with the Learning Commons with Alan, and I work with the bio peers, which I'll talk about a little later on in the session. But this workshop talk is really a part of what we're trying to do to make sure that everyone that most students that start in the semester at least have some kind of footing, are off on a good foot at the beginning of the semester, know how to approach the material and whatnot. I'm also an adjunct instructor as well in the bio department, so I can give kind of pointers from that angle as well as to how to prepare for classes. With that, I'm going to start sharing my screen so we can get into the slides. So let me pull up my PowerPoint and let me share. Okay. All right, so let's begin. So the main point of the talk for today really is to kind of plant some seeds to make sure that you are all aware of different techniques and strategies that you can utilize to better prepare yourself for the semester ahead in bio. So before we jump into, I guess, the meat and potatoes of today's talk, in the case where some of you may not have taken a bio class here yet, I thought I put a couple of slides just showing where the rooms are and where your classes will be held. So for lecture for both Bio 105 and 106, they're going to be in Kiley Hall. So it's that big gray building at the front of the campus. So if you walk in through the main gate, it's literally that big gray building in front of the campus. The room is on the first floor. It's room 170, okay? And the room looks like this. So I took this picture last night for you. So there it is, okay? So make sure that you're going to this room for your lectures. As for lab, the lab rooms look like this. All right, so the one I'm sitting in now is the 105 room. And again, this is going to be in the science building, so across campus, okay? So you can either enter in through the Melbourne Avenue entrance or through the front gate and then just walk all the way to the back of campus until you see a big red building with a bunch of glass. That's the science building. Okay, both labs are going to be on the second floor of the building, and they will be, both rooms are adjacent to one another, okay? So the 105 room is B237, and then the 106 room is in B241. So you really can't miss it. If you ever get lost in the building, just look for the blue striped walls. That hallway on the second floor is where the lab rooms are located, okay? So now, before we get into the actual talk for today, I thought for everyone to kind of get acquainted with at least some people in the room, we do a little bit of a breakout activity. I'm going to drop the document, the activity sheet in the chat. I'll drop both a PDF and a Word document version. So let me know if you received all of it. And I'm going to open up breakout rooms. And so what you're going to be doing for the next 10 minutes or so is get acquainted with your classmates that are here, and do activities sections A through C. Okay. And the whole point of this is so that you can see where you're at now in terms of preparing for classes, reading a textbook and whatnot. And then once you do that, we'll come back together and kind of go through some strategies on how to approach a textbook and all that stuff, okay? So breakout, there's 90 of you guys, so we can do like 10 breakout rooms and have 9 of you in the group. Okay, let's see. Okay, there we go. So you guys can go to your breakout rooms now, and then I will pop in from room to room. I think everyone's back, so I'm gonna share my screen again with the slides, and then we'll go through everything. Okay. Let's see. All right, there we go. Okay. So let's get into actually looking at some of these strategies that we can use to read a textbook, study for class, etc. As we go through the slides, you'll see that some of the activities that you guys did in your breakout rooms come up again, and essentially what we're going to do is talk about them while I'm presenting these slides. Another thing I'll just mention before we start is that none of you have taken any of my classes yet, but when I do teach, I do not go on to the next slide until someone answers me. So if there is a question, someone's gonna have to say something, or we're not going on to the next slide, okay? Just keep that in mind. Okay, so first, let's tackle reading a science textbook. I am firm believer in having a hard copy of a textbook. And the reason for that is because when you have your textbook, you're able to feel the textbook, and you can flip through the pages very easily, and you can look up things in the back of the book very easily. All these, just having a hard copy makes it so much easier to actually read the textbook, but then also study from it. So most of these strategies are applicable to both using a textbook online and having a hard copy, but I'm going to emphasize having the hard copy over anything else, okay? So most students typically, from my own experience as a student also, most students that don't succeed very well in reading textbooks and extracting material from there really just read the material straight through. So they'll open up the textbook, they'll find the chapter that they need, and they'll literally just read from the beginning of the chapter to the end of the chapter and do nothing else. All right. That typically does not work in bio. There's a lot of information in the textbook. There's a lot of information given to you in lecture. So your goal, your job really is to make sure that you're able to kind of synchronize the two, right? The lecture and then the textbook, all right? You don't want to do more work if you don't have to, right? The other thing is a lot of students kind of speed through the textbook. They read very passively, they just kind of run through it, and they don't really pay attention to any of the detail in the textbook. And to my own fault, sometimes I also do this, right? I'll read a section of a textbook and then I may not understand a single word in that passage, but I still continue on reading, all right? I don't take the time to stop and reassess myself. So these 4 bullet points are things that a lot of students, especially those that are just starting out in the sciences, have a really hard time overcoming, okay? So as a successful student, typically, you should always monitor your own understanding, right? You should make sure that whenever you're reading something, it really makes sense. It really clicks for you. And that's very important because a lot of the time, the content that you get in your lecture classes and even the content that you get in your textbook chapters, they all scaffold on each other, all right? They build on each other, creating larger concepts, right? Or feeding into larger concepts. The other main thing that I would also urge a lot of students to do is to always reread sections that you may find difficult, all right? If you ever sit there and start wondering, like, I don't understand, or my head hurts, or whatever it is, it's typically because you're not comprehending what you're reading, right? The words may be too big, they may be fancy, you may not understand them, right? So it's very important that you really take the time in the initial read, right, to understand what you are reading, okay? In addition to that, I would also urge that you don't just read it once and then don't read again, right? You want to be reading continuously, all right? You want to periodically read, and you want to periodically review the material as you are reading it, all right? So let's say, for example, you read half a chapter today, and now it's the next day, you should go back, reread the summaries for those sections of that chapter, and then continue on with the new reading, okay? Don't just start where you left off and continue on. You won't retain as much. You might get confused, you might get lost, okay? And the last point I want to make is that sometimes textbook reading, again, can get very overwhelming. So it's very important to contextualize and then organize the material, right? It's very important to do that. That could be in the context of a concept map, so where you have a central idea in the center of your page and you kind of just draw arrows spanning from that central idea. You can use charts, graphs. I typically like to use diagrams in the textbook where I'll print them out and write things in on them. So whatever works for you, really, right? Because you are your own person, you kind of decide what works best for you. So one of the methods that really takes all of this into account is the PQ4R method. All right, another acronym, yes. So the P stands for preview. So the preview here is where you're looking at the textbook before coming into class. All right, that can also be applied to your slides. You're looking at the slides or the textbook before coming into class. Now, that doesn't mean that you have to read the entire chapter. It doesn't even mean that you have to read the chapter, okay? All that it means is go through the chapter, go through your slides and just skim, right? Look at some of the headings, all right? So in this case, like I pulled this chapter from your bio textbook, actually. And so like, okay, this week you're covering proteins, carbs, and lipids. So what are you gonna do? You're gonna open up the textbook and you're going to just look at the title of the chapter. Look at the key concepts that are covered in this chapter, okay? Just so that you have some kind of idea of what to expect when you're coming into class, whenever that may be. The next part of that method is to question, right? So let's say you've skimmed the book, you had the class, now you're actually trying to read the textbook. So you have to question your understanding within this textbook, within this chapter, okay? And as you read each section, you should always ask yourself, right? What is the main focus of this particular section or chapter? What information do I need to extract from this chapter? And most of the time, your textbook will actually tell you these things, all right? It's not printed in the textbook just for happenstance, right? It's there for a particular reason. It's supposed to help you, okay? And so each one of these sections of a textbook have something that tells you what you are expected to extract from that reading. All right, so here's an example. Okay, so if you were just skimming through the textbook, all right, and you came across this section, so this is from chapter 3, chapter I just had mentioned prior. The key, so here it says key concept, right? So section 3.4, key concept are lipids. So lipids are defined by their solubility and chemical structure. By reading just that heading, you know that in this section, what you should be looking for are things relating to how and when lipids are soluble, right? And what they're soluble in. And then what is the chemical structure, right, of the actual lipid? How are lipids generated? What kind of molecules compose lipids, okay? What kind of atoms even compose the lipids, okay? And if you read the first sentence, you can get this. And then if you go look at the focused learning part of that section, which is what I mentioned a little earlier, it tells you the 3 main bullet points that you need to focus on in this particular chapter, all right? It literally lines it out for you. So if you're hitting these points every time you're going into that particular section, you're guaranteed to at least retain something, right? Now, following this, there is the 4R method, so the 4R component of the PQ4R method. So one of the R's stands for, obviously, the reading component, right? And as you are reading, Dr. Fath mentioned, you should study actively, you should read actively. You should ask yourself, am I understanding this material? If you are not understanding the material, it's really you should take it upon yourself to go back, all right, and figure it out. If you have a hard time figuring it out, that's where you have to kind of take further steps, right? Go the professor's office hours, look up stuff online, go watch YouTube videos, whatever it may be, refer back to your lecture, whatever it is. So that's the reading actively, right? You're not just looking at the words, right? You're not just reading the material. You're also engaging with the material. You're trying to make sure that you understand everything before going on to the next passage or the next section. Once you've been able to read the section, the chapter actively, and you've understood what you've read, it's very important that you reflect on that reading, okay? And the reflection aspect really comes into tying the concepts in that chapter, in that section, to other sections, to other chapters, okay? So if we're looking at, let's say, the chapter on macromolecules, so again, this chapter, this infamous chapter 3 that I keep mentioning from your textbook, you should ask yourself, okay, how does the structural components that are mentioned in the section for lipids relate to other macromolecules, right? Are there similar types of bonds formed, right? Do they interact the same way, right? Are they soluble in the same way? You then should go and relate yourself, your understanding to other chapters that you've read prior, right? So in this case, you know, how do these macromolecules potentially influence the structure and functions of cells, for instance, right? So these are types of things that you can do to kind of start thinking critically about all the material that you're learning in the class as well as in your reading, okay? And it's always important that as you're reflecting on the material that you're learning and reading, that you're also thinking of your own examples, okay? Because if you can teach it to yourself or to someone, or provide examples to yourself or someone, you've achieved some sort of mastery of the material. Now, the last two R's of the method are referring to recital, or to recite, right? And then to review. Repetition and being able to recite the material are one of the keys to succeeding in really any course, all right? Especially a course that is filled with a lot of facts, a lot of scientific reasoning, a lot of experimentation, right? As you are doing in bio. So the point of the recital is really to make sure that you're retaining as much as you possibly can. All right. And by doing these 4 steps or these 4 bullet points, you will retain, and you should be able to recite quite regularly. So obviously for every piece that you read, whether it be a section or a chapter, however you want to do it, list the major points, right? Make them as concise as possible. Write them out for yourself. All right. Don't type it, write it. If you handwrite things, you will retain more information, I promise you. Then create a visual image of concepts. Some of you may be visual learners. Some of you may think that you're not visual learners. But I will say this, I never thought myself as a visual learner until like my junior year of college. Because it took me some time to realize that I was a visual learner. But try it. Try printing out a diagram. Try drawing something, right? And see if that helps you retain the information. For me personally, like, I figured out, okay, if I print a diagram and I take notes on the diagram from the textbook, I actually retain a lot more information than if I was just staring at the diagram and not taking any notes or not highlighting or not whatever, right? So I would, again, encourage you to use the images in the textbook, annotate them, draw your own things, draw diagrams, whatever it is, okay? And again, the recital also comes from the connections that you make with the other sections of that same chapter, as well as the connections you make with other chapters that kind of scaffold on the previous material. So let's talk about some ways that we can optimize textbook use, right? So how can we actually use a textbook? So this textbook, Life, the Science of Biology, really should be your Bible for the next, 4 months? You really should. I mean, this thing contains all the information that you need to know for the class, all right? With the exception of some examples, like Dr. Baker had mentioned, he gives some examples of his own, right? But more or less, this is your go-to. Everything that you need to know really is in this textbook, okay? But the one thing I want to emphasize is that reading alone is not studying, all right? You really have to be able to extract the information from the textbook in order to consider it studying, okay? So let's first talk about skimming. Now, I mentioned that skimming is very important before class, all right? Again, this is skimming the textbook or even skimming the slides that are provided for you, whatever it is, all right? This is typically what I tell my students to do. I tell them to open up that chapter that they're interested in, right? And flip through the chapter, literally flip through it. As you're flipping through it, what catches your attention, all right? I remember when I was taking Bio 105, I flipped through a few of my chapters and things that, there were certain like experiments that caught my eye, so I stopped on them and reviewed them before class. And surely enough, they were covered in lecture. So I already knew something going into lecture, all right? As you're flipping through it, as you're skimming the chapter, you don't have to read all the words, obviously, but I would pay close attention to, again, the chapter titles, the words that are either italicized or bolded. Look at any of the pictures, right? Just read them. The pictures that they have in the textbook have little bubbles on them with that are labeling the diagram or picture. So it really will take like 2 minutes to do. Look at any of the diagrams, the charts, whatever it is, okay? And just by doing that and by reading those things, you will be more prepared than the average person, right? Going into the class. So again, I would highly encourage you to really go in and skim the textbook or even the slides before going into class. All right. It will prove itself very, very useful in the long run. Now, whenever you're done with your class, your lecture, and it's time for you to start studying, and you have to read a textbook, the first thing that I would suggest doing, and again, this works for me, I would actually go to the end of the textbook of the chapter first and read the chapter summary, okay? When you read the chapter summary, it's a very concise paragraph that just describes what was covered, the main points that were covered in that chapter, okay? And that way, by reading that last section of the chapter, that chapter summary, you really get a good idea of what you're going to be reading in the actual chapter from the beginning to the end, right? Once you read the end of the chapter, then flip over back to the beginning of the chapter and read the introduction, okay? And don't skip the introduction. The introduction is very important because it kind of gets you thinking about the ideas that are going to be presented in that chapter, right? An introduction is called an introduction because it's trying to get you acquainted with what you're about to experience, right? So I would not skip over those. And when I say introduction, I mean, like, let me go back a couple of slides so I can show you. So like this here is the introduction, all right, to the actual chapter, all right? It's an example, but it provides a very good overview, an example-based overview of what the chapter will include. Now, some of you, including myself, have a really hard time with reading mass volumes at any given moment, okay? And that's fine, right? So what I used to do is I used to break down my chapter into 10-page chunks. Sometimes it'd be like 12 pages, 13 pages, whatever it is, as long as I'm not stopping midsection, okay? And after each chunk, after I would read that, let's say 10-page chunk, I actually would go back, look at my notes that I have highlighted in the actual text itself, and then kind of just write in some examples that I'm thinking of myself, okay? And I would keep doing this over and over until you finish the chapter. Now, of course, once you finish a 10-page chunk, I wouldn't necessarily go on to the next 10 pages. I would take like a 5-10 minute breather, get some water, get something to eat, and then go back to reading the next 10 pages or whatever it may be. All right. I used to use 10 to 12 page chunks, but again, you guys can use whatever works for you, whatever is manageable for you. All right. If you have a longer attention span, make the chunks larger, right? If you have a shorter attention span, make them a little shorter. That's okay. Your goal is, again, to actively read as opposed to just kind of skimming through and not really getting that much. Okay. So how can you actively engage in textbook reading? So one of the ways that we can do this is by highlighting or underlining, okay? So with the highlighting and underlining, my suggestion would be to read the passage through one time, right? Then go back to it and read it the second time. As you're reading it the second time, you should start underlining or highlighting some of the key words or phrases, okay? So really take time with it, because if you get it right the first time, you take your time the first time, you don't have to go back to it over and over, all right? It should be a one and done, okay? So in this case, so here is this excerpt from the textbook from chapter 3 that you guys had to practice during your breakout activity. So I'm going to ask you guys, what in this particular passage should I highlight? And remember, I will not go on until someone says something.
Can I answer?
Sure.
Is it like, would you highlight the colloquially called fats? Would that be one part?
I mean, you can, of course. However, we're looking for like facts that relate to our key concept, right? So our concept here is solubility and chemical structure, okay? So let's start off with the first sentence together. So lipids, colloquially called fats, are hydrocarbons that are insoluble in water because of their many non-polar covalent bonds, okay? So from that one sentence, what do you think you can highlight here? And again, they have to relate to solubility and chemical structure.
Insoluble in water.
Very good. So insoluble in water. Okay. What else?
Non-polar covalent bonds.
Very good. All right. You've now just extracted pieces of information that support your learning concept for this section. Okay. So let's continue. As you saw in key concept 2.2, non-polar hydrocarbon molecules are hydrophobic and preferentially aggregate together away from water, which is polar. Okay. So from that sentence, what can we highlight?
Non-polar hydrocarbon molecules are hydrophobic.
Very good. Exactly right. Okay. Again, this particular piece from the sentence is describing lipids, right? What we're focusing on. And it's focusing on specifically the solubility, okay, and the chemical structure. All right. You wouldn't highlight water is polar because we're not talking about water here. We're talking about lipids. You would have learned water is polar in the first chapter, all right, of the semester. Okay, let's continue from there. So when non-polar hydrocarbons are sufficiently close to one another, weak but additive van der Waals forces help keep them together. What can we highlight here?
I'm sorry. I would say that van der Waals forces help them held together. It's main idea.
Exactly. Very good. So the van der Waals forces are keeping these molecules together. All right. So do you see how this is working, how you can extract things that relate to your learning key concept from that section? So this is what you really should be doing when you're reading a textbook. Everything else that's in between is all fluff, right? It's not going to help you with anything. All right. But the rest of the stuff is important. All right. Now, why don't we highlight nonpolar hydrocarbons? Does anyone know?
We already highlighted it from top.
Exactly. You already highlighted it beforehand. There's no reason to do it again. You already know this fact. Okay. So this is how you typically should highlight. So with that being said, just make sure that you don't over highlight and you also don't under highlight. All right. So you should always consciously evaluate what you think is important as it relates to your key concept, your key learning concept. Okay. And how do you find this learning concept? Again, it's written for you in very large letters, right, at the top of a section. All right. So another thing that you can do is box and number. All right. So in this case, the box transitions are going to be where you have a list of things. All right. So the list of things could be in sequential order, first, second, third, whatever. Or if it's describing some kind of process, right? So where this happens first, next this happens, finally this happens. Okay. Or any kind of examples. If you box in those words, you know where to look when you're looking for a process or where you're looking for an example. Okay. One of my friends used to actually box in transitions with like a red pen and then like the examples in a green pen, for instance. Whatever works for you. Okay. But you can box them in. So let's start off with this bottom passage here. So the migration of the two sets of daughter chromosomes to the poles of the cell is highly organized and active process. Three mechanisms operate to move the chromosomes along. First, the kinetic cores contain molecular motor proteins, including kinesins and cytoplasmic dyneins, which blah, 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 yada, yada. All right. So from here, what can we box? I know it's a silly thing to ask, but what can you box?
Like what goes first?
Yeah, so you literally can just box first, all right? So I mean, this is literally what I would do. It sounds, again, childish, but as long as it helps you organize your information, right? So first here, next we have second, all right? So second, the kinetic core microtubules shorten, blah, blah, blah. And then third, the centrosomes move apart. And then the last stage of mitosis is telophase. And you can box in the last stage, all right? So now you have an order in which these 4 different steps of mitosis take place, all right? So in this case, you can see first, second, third, and last, and you can list it on your paper when you're writing in your own notes, okay? And then we have finally over here. At times, I also put, when I put the boxes, I'll also put numbers in front of them, all right? Just so I can express that written number as an actual numerical value. So for instance, if it says first, I'll put number 1. So I know that's step number 1, okay? So you can do this to list information, number important ideas, whatever it is, right? Box the transitions. Again, it just keeps everything in an organized format so the word does not get lost within the paragraph. You're able to find it as soon as you turn to that page. Okay. Another tip that I would give is, yes, the section is labeled chromosome movement, but you can also kind of write a little arrow off the side and be like, okay, this is like mitosis or whatever. Okay. In this case here, you see this diagram already has these numbered transitions for you. So it goes step by step as to what it is, and then you have these numbered transitions. My suggestion also would be to you, if you're a visual learner, I would get this diagram from your textbook, and I think you all are required to get the online access to the textbook anyways. take a screenshot of the picture, put it onto a Word document, block out all these different words, and after you read the section, go in and write in all the different steps. Because if you label your own diagram based on your understanding, of course it has to be correct, but if you're labeling it in your own words, it'll make much more sense to you when you're reading it back to yourself. Okay. So vocabulary. Now you'll notice that the textbook a lot of times has bolded or italicized words. So the bolded words are vocabulary. Okay. So it's very important that you keep track of the vocabulary. Now, the way I used to do this, and again, it may take you some time to get used to the amount of work that is involved with this. For the vocabulary, I used to keep a running list of vocab words from chapter to chapter on a Microsoft Word document. And I would type out the definition, not verbatim from the textbook, but I would actually like rewrite it in my own words to make it a little more understanding to me. All right, because the matter of the fact is, it doesn't matter. I mean, it matters what the definition is, but like if you make a definition that makes sense to you and it's factually correct, and you're able to recognize it on an exam, that's the only thing that matters. Okay, so so again, I made the vocabulary list, and then I used to go into Quizlet. All right, or you can use Anki, which I'll talk about in a couple of slides. And I used to make flashcards. And so when I used to be on the bus studying for Bio 105, I used to just kind of like practice the flashcards on the bus, with people yelling around me. So any which way that you can consolidate your information, organize it, will help you. So from this passage here, so only this passage, we're not looking at this figure description at all. Let's start off together. So pili are structures made of protein that project from surfaces of some types of bacterial cells. From this first sentence, what word can I circle as a potential vocabulary word?
Pili.
Pili, very good. So you circle pili, fantastic. Let's continue. These hair-like structures are shorter than flagella and are used for adherence. What can I circle there?
Flagella.
Flagella. Very good. Conjugative pili, or also known as sex pili, help bacteria join to one another to exchange genetic material. Anything to circle there?
Conjugative pili.
So you definitely could circle it if you can't make the distinction on your own. I personally did not circle it, all right? But yes, that is something that you can circle because it does have a different function, of course. Sorry. But I was looking for adherence as another example in case you don't know what the word adherence means, okay? You're going to circle words that you don't understand either way, right? So like even if it's regular English and you don't understand it, I would still circle it because you need to know what the words mean to apply it to the actual structure. All right, let's go on. Fimbriae are composed of the same proteins as pili, but are shorter and help cells adhere to surfaces such as animal cells for food and protection. So what can we circle there? If you can't pronounce it, it's okay. Just try.
Fimbriae.
Fimbriae, yeah, very good. So fimbriae, all right. You've now made a list of what looks like 4 words that you can go back, find definitions for, and then put them into flashcards, for instance, okay? Now, sometimes whenever you're reading a passage, the textbook does this awesome thing where it gives you the actual definition of the word. So in this case, we're looking for pili. So here is the definition of what a pilus is, all right? So in this case, it's going to be a protein that is projecting from a surface of a cell, typically found on bacterial cells, okay? And you can label this with like a marking like definition. So you know that this is in fact a definition. Sometimes, and when I took cell bio with Dr. Fath, I used to highlight the definitions along with the word in a different color in contrast to my regular highlighting that I was doing in the book. And then finally, the last tip I can give you here for like reading and extracting information really is to jot down any kind of main ideas from that section of the book. All right. So I had already read to you this section. So does anyone want to tell me what is an example of like a sentence to summarize this small section of the textbook? So one sentence, what can you say about all this information in one sentence? How can you summarize it in one sentence, really? Anyone? Remember, we don't go on until someone says something. I don't mind painfully staring at my screen for the next 30 minutes. Anyone?
I'm confused. Do we grab a sentence from the paragraph or do like we make our own
You
sentence?
make your own. You always make your own. So you always should make your own sentence, because if you're going to copy from the textbook, you're not, it's not really that you're understanding anything. It's you're really just kind of copying from the textbook. If you understand the passage, then you should just come up with one sentence. So let me read it to you again in one continuous reading, and hopefully maybe it'll make sense then, okay? So pili are structures made of protein that project from the surfaces of some types of bacterial cells. These hair-like structures are shorter than flagella and are used for adherence. Conjugated sex pili help bacteria join to one another to exchange genetic material. Fimbriae are composed of the same types of proteins as pili, but are shorter and help cells adhere to surfaces, such as animal cells, for food and protection. So in one sentence, how can you summarize this entire paragraph?
Function of pili.
Sure. So again, you want to include the function of pili, right? So you can say pili made of proteins help bacteria attach to surfaces, right? That's the adherence part, and allow for the exchange of genetic material. So we've included the two main functions of pili as well as their composition, all right? And then where they're found in one sentence, okay? I know this is not easy to do, so I don't want anyone to feel overwhelmed or anything. It takes some time to develop the skill to do this, I guess. So if you try this on your first go around, when reading your own textbooks, you know, it may take some time for you to kind of wrap around the main idea of the section, okay? So just bear that in mind, okay?
I definitely feel like that's one of my struggles personally. Like if you were to tell me do one sentence, my sentence would just go on and on and on. And there, you know, I just reset everything in the paragraph. But yeah, definitely takes practice.
Absolutely. So that's one of the things I wanted to mention a little later is that, you know, we have tutors, we have peers. I'm available at times, you know, your professors are available to kind of help you with this as well, you know, to make sure that you're understanding the main idea of what you're reading or what you're looking at. All right. So you have support in that respect. But just keep trying it on your own as well. All right. Don't give up if you're at an impasse. You have to get through it somehow. Okay.
Sorry, I have
yeah.
a question. So basically, it's like we can take out the main idea with the same words of the paragraph, or create like our own sentence, like in our own definition.
Yeah, so you can use the vocabulary from the textbook or from the slides, absolutely. But you want to formulate it in your own sentence so that way you understand what exactly you're looking at, right? Because if you're copying from a textbook, sometimes you won't, I mean, you'll copy it, it sounds great to you, but what if you had a hard time understanding that one sentence, right? If it's in your own words, you read it back to yourself, but you typically know what you mean, all right? It's the same thing that applies to like handwriting, right? If someone else writes something for you, you may think their handwriting is sloppy, you don't know how to read it back. You don't understand it, right? Typically, you know how to read your own handwriting, so you can tell if it's yours or not. So that's the same idea here, but it's just applied to a conceptual knowledge as opposed to a tactile thing. So, yeah, but you can certainly use the vocabulary from the passage, but just write your own sentence.
Okay, so it's just like make the sentence understandable to ourselves in a way that we can remember it later, right?
Exactly.
Okay, thank you.
Right on the money. You see, you just took what I rambled on for like 5 minutes into one sentence. So you're doing it right now as well. All right, that's literally what you're doing for the textbook as well. Okay, let's go on to the last couple of things I want to mention. Always write your own ideas in square brackets. So if there's something that you think relates to this concept, but you didn't cover it yet, but you've learned it from somewhere else, put it in a bracket, put a sticky note or something, and then look it up or go ask a professor or whatever it is. Okay.
Okay.
And also generate questions. So always generate questions to make sure that you're again engaging with the material. All right. So again, if you think that there's something that relates to the topic, write down some kind of question that you may have. I used to do that a lot with my classes. If I had an idea or something, especially in genetics, when I had an idea, I would write it down and then I would go see Dr. Melendez and ask her a bunch of questions about it to kind of reiterate my understanding of the material. And in some cases I was right, some cases I was wrong, and everything was then resolved at the end. So here's an example of my textbook. Now this is a lot of highlighting, I think, looking back at it now as a graduate. But when I took Bio 105, this is literally this is actually my textbook. So you can see I highlighted all the words. So I put lists of things. So lists of things or proteins, enzymes, whatever in pink. Any kind of like definition based or factual based things I put in green. And then between different processes, I also put things in orange. Okay. And then as we went on to look at different types of processes, so this is looking at what is it called? DNA replication. Is this DNA replication? No, it's we're making RNA, so it's actually transcription. So looking at transcription here, so I literally went in and I kind of like wrote in all this different stuff into the textbook and stuff. So you don't have to deface your textbook like I did, but if you keep your books like I do, I have so many textbooks. It's good to have it because you can always go back to it and see what you wrote in for that chapter. All right. So again, showing you just an example of how this looks like. So when should you be using a textbook? A lot of students, again, kind of reiterating some of the other things I had mentioned. A lot of students, read a lot of the textbook and not the important parts of the textbook. So there's this notion that you don't want to miss anything, right? And the reality is that's very much impossible. The likelihood of you not missing something is, I mean, you will miss some stuff, and that's fine. All right. A lot of students want to remember everything. Also impossible. All right. Your memory is only flexible to a certain extent. I wouldn't rely on it. I mean, you should rely on it, but it shouldn't be the main, I guess, focus of your studies, right? You really want to study to understand, not just to memorize. A lot of students think that skimming is not productive at all. That is not the case. skimming is very productive, especially if you're using that technique before going into class. And then speed reading. Speed reading is not an effective strategy to read a textbook. Once again, you take your time. It should be a one and done. You don't need to keep going back to the textbook over and over and over unless you're confused, right? So don't speed read, do skim, all right? And don't be hard on yourself if you forget certain things. It will happen, okay? So now when should you actually be using a textbook? So I tell all my students who are in the upper level classes that, if you're reading a textbook, sometimes, going to class, doing the lecture, doing the homework, reading the entire book is just too much, right? And you only have a limited amount of time. You guys are always in labs as well, there's lab work to do. So I always tell students, focus primarily on the sections of the textbook that were covered in your lecture class, all right? So if Dr. Fath or Dr. Garofalo or Dr. Baker don't cover a section of the textbook, I'm not saying not to read it, but I would say put it off until the last minute, just because you want to get the foundations of what was covered in class first, and then focus on the excess stuff that was not covered in class. Okay? That being said, if one of your professors ends up teaching you something that is not in the textbook, you should focus on it. All right. So everything that is covered in lecture is fair game. Okay. And you should be reading up on it. Right. The other thing that I want to mention is the textbook is not really like, yes, you read it to review the sections of the material from lecture, but you really only should be using the textbook as a supplement. All right. And what do I mean by this? Let's say you're confused about something. Let's say you want an example for something. Let's say that you want to get much more detail on a topic for class. That's when you use the textbook. All right. The textbook is not made for you to kind of like live and eat and breathe with it, right? Like you really use it when you need it. Okay. But that being said, again, the textbook is a very good tool to supplement to your lecture material. Okay. And now taking notes. So I take notes in my textbooks. If you own a copy of a book, that's fine. You do what you want with your copy. If you don't have a book that you want to buy or you want to take notes on the side, having a handout, like an actual piece of paper, right? To take notes the old school way, it's fine. Or if you have the money to invest into a tablet of some sort, an iPad or something, or if you have an iPad, if your family has an iPad, convert that into a study tool. Use it to take notes. So this is from my iPad. I was studying for the MCAT over this past winter, and I had to study about human development, human gestation, really. And I ended up using this diagram from online, and I ended up writing in my textbook notes on the side of the diagram. All right. And they're all in my own words. All right. So you see, I took a whole 3-sentence paragraph and I made it into one little line. At 3 weeks, heart starts to beat, stuff like that. So that's how you can take notes from a textbook. Another thing that you can do is if you don't have an iPad or a tablet or whatever, which is not necessary to do well in these classes, you can print out your slides. Everyone here gets $10 every semester as part of your tuition on your Q card. So you go to the Q card either in the Learning Commons or in the library or in the printing area in the student union, and you can print for 5 cents a page. All right. So it's not 5 cents per copy. It's 5 cents per physical page. All right. So you can get a front and back copy of your slides, 4 slides per page, take it with you to lecture and take your notes on there, and then take your notes from the textbook afterwards. So that's an option for you as well. The other thing I want to mention are the table of contents, which, let's be honest, none of you are going to open or look at. You'll probably just put a bookmark into chapter 2, and then when it's time for chapter 3, you'll go over to the next chapter, right? But the 2 things that I think you really need to pay attention to are the two appendices in the back of the book. So we have the index and the glossary. The index is essentially a roadmap, a list of different names, places, things, whatever, nouns of some sort, that are mentioned somewhere in the book. All right. So you can see here that, I don't know, let's see. So an abiotic environment, all right, or in this case, let's say an ABO blood group system. All right, I'll choose a topic that I'm familiar with. An ABO blood group system. So this is the blood typing section, right? So you can see that they're found on page 251 to 252 of the textbook. So click on that and you go work that page, and there's the material for that particular topic. So this is very, very useful and important when you are scaffolding material, right? If you are reviewing something in chapter 3, but you need material for from chapter 2, you can look up material from chapter 2, certain keywords in the index, and it'll tell you which page they're on without having to scroll through the entire chapter to find that material, right? So very, very important aspect of the textbook. The other thing is a glossary. So any of the words or any of the phrases that are in bold are defined for you with a textbook dictionary definition in the glossary at the back of the book as well. All right. So this is from your textbook directly. And you can see this is a 3' N, 5' N. So these are talking about DNA polarities. And you can see they give you the definition as to what they are. Okay. So with that, let me jump into note-taking, just because our next activity that we're going to run in about 10 minutes is based on note-taking strategies, okay? So why is it important to take notes? Obviously, you're not going to catch everything in class. So in order to maximize this, you have to write things down. You won't remember things all the time. So by writing things down, you're guaranteeing that you're going to be successful in remembering the stuff from lecture, right? Simultaneously, as you're writing things down or practicing taking notes, you're also going to be developing your skills as an active listener, all right? Or what I like to call selective listening, because sometimes people make noise around you and it distracts you, right? So having this ability, again, makes it very easy to take notes if you know what to look out for or what to write down, right? So let's look at some methods. So the first type of method is the Cornell method, which you will be practicing today. I think it's one of the more neat and organized methods to taking notes, okay? And the good thing about this particular method is that it does not require a lot of recopying, all right? Because this is really, once you make this study sheet, this is really your study guide for whatever topic you're working on. So how is it done? Essentially, it's just a full-length sheet that you divide into 3 sections. There's a 2 to 3 inch left-hand section. Majority of your page is a right-hand section, and then the bottom portion of that that page is going to be the summary section. Okay, so on the left-hand side, we have things called cues. So cues are going to be pretty much like facts, phrases, questions you may have, whatever it is, and you put them into the cues area here. All right, and I'll show you an example of some in just a sec. Once you write down the question, the fact, the keyword, whatever it is, you write down any associated phrases, ideas, or facts into this right-hand section here. Okay, so for example, if we were talking about the lipid stuff, right, you would put lipids, all right, and then you could put lipid solubility as one of your cues, and then you can say, and then one of your notes could be, oh, lipids are non-polar, lipids are insoluble in water, whatever, okay? So that is an example of how you can utilize the Cornell method. The bottom portion of the page, again, is a summary. So remember how we took and we wrote that 1-sentence summary for the section on the pili for bacteria? Same thing applies here. It's a 1 to 2 sentence summary summarizing the main idea for that section. And that's it, okay? By doing this and having this for every section, you're going to be organizing your notes in such a way where it'll be easier for you to study the material and kind of effectively organize your material as well. So here's an example of this, and some more of a broken down description of what I just had mentioned. So the cues, again, these are written after class or while you're reading the book or reviewing the slides, and you write down any exam questions, any ideas or main ideas, vocabulary, whatever it is. You put down cues, right? The notes are the main points, right? You make them bullet points as easy as possible to read, as concise as possible. You paraphrase, make abbreviations, use acronyms, whatever it is, whatever makes it easier for you to comprehend. You also can start drawing diagrams, putting diagrams into here. And the bottom again is that summary. So here's an example, and this example is provided for you onto the worksheet that I already shared with all of you. But you can see here are some cues that this person wrote in. This is not my work, as a part of talking about the anatomy and really the anatomy and physiology of the stomach, right? So here, I think whoever it is wrote, what is the anatomy of the stomach? So then the person wrote out all the anatomical structures of the stomach. And then they drew a picture and labeled all the parts of the stomach, right? Then they want to know, well, how does the mechanical digestion occur in the stomach? So they wrote out all the components of the mechanical digestion and then drew it out here as well, right? And then how does the stomach chemically digest food? Well, we wrote out all the stuff here. There's no image, but it is what it is, right? And then the summary. So you take the main point from each one of these cues. The stomach is made of 3 muscular layers, right? As described here, an outer layer of serosa. During maceration, the stomach churns the food into the food and gastric glands add chemicals and enzymes to lead to the formation of chyme, all right, of chyme. So that's how you would use a Cornell note, for instance, okay? Very, very effective. I have not used it myself, but it is very, very effective. So that's one option. The other option is what a lot of people do anyways, and that is the outline method, all right? Essentially, for this one, you're starting off with a main topic, and from that main topic, you're branching out subtopics. So the subtopics can be a little broader subtopics or can be very small subtopics, okay? Whatever makes it easier for you to understand, all right? From those subtopics, you have smaller bullet points that list facts, major points that relate to that subtopic, all right? But everything should fall under the same umbrella as they all relate to the main premise of that chapter, the main topic, okay? So here's an example. It's not really a bio example, but it's does the job. So here's the main topic, the body language that we're referring to. We have the subtopic so body language is mediated through movement, through facial expressions, through gestures, posture, right? And then we list little facts that kind of belong within each of those subtopics. So some of my tips for you regarding note-taking. You should take notes, even if professors give you outlines or provide PowerPoint slides. That's a given, right? Dr. Baker even said that sometimes he'll say examples in class, right, that you are responsible for. So again, make sure that you are taking notes. I would always have a set of slides on me before coming to class. So that means either getting a printed version of the slides or getting an electronic copy to follow along while you're in class. The other thing that I would suggest is to record lectures. I believe everyone in the class, all the professors for the classes this semester allow for recording. So I don't see why not, all right? You all have an iPhone or a Samsung phone for the most part, right? So it's okay if your phone is on the counter for an hour and 30 minutes and you're not looking at your phone, okay? They're on the counter recording the lecture, the audio recording. And that way, you won't have access to your phone, which is great. On top of that, you should also be taking notes in the margins of the slides, all right? And after listening, you should go home and then re-listen to after going to lecture, go home, re-listen to the recording, and then write in more details if need be. My biggest suggestion for you is, if you're studying, you should be always reviewing your notes, polishing your notes, fleshing them out within a 24 to 48 hour cycle. The reason for this is because if you do not, there's a very good likelihood that you'll fall back or fall behind. You may forget certain things. So please make sure that you're going to lecture, let's say on a Tuesday night, by Wednesday and Thursday, you should be working the notes for that lecture. All right. If you have class on that Thursday night, on Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, or Sunday, work the notes for that lecture and keep up with it. If you're actively taking notes, actively reading, and actively studying, you don't have to go frantically trying to prepare yourself for the exam 2 or 3 days before the exam, right? You'll be comfortable in understanding the material before the exam, all right? You should be studying for the exam if you're well prepared 3 or 4 days in advance and just touching up on things that you still have a hard time with. And that's it, if you're keeping up with the continuous studying, okay? That being said, the reality again here is that a lot of students sometimes will use borrowed notes. That does not typically result in very good grades at the end of the semester. And by borrowed notes, I mean, there's no secret that there are things floating around between students on campus, especially in 105 and 106, right? There are people that have shared study sheets, study guides, whatever. Yes, you can certainly use them if you get your hands on them, fine. But I would strongly suggest that you make your own notes, because if you make something of your own again, you write it in such a way that you understand it and it helps it click better in your head, right? So don't copy other people's notes, make your own notes, okay? That being said, I think as Dr. Baker alluded to it earlier, work with your classmates, right? Talk with your classmates, go over problems together, study together, okay? A lot of students also think, oh, I can just go to class and not take any notes. That typically doesn't work either, okay? So if you're that type of person, I guess great for you, but most of you, I promise, are not going to be able to do well if you don't take notes. And lastly, like I said, try to record the lectures. I think Dr. Baker had mentioned in the chat that that they're recorded, the lectures are recorded as well, okay? All right, so here are some just examples. This is from my biochemistry class. Just wanted to show you some of the things I used to do in my class. So, so this, I used to print out double copies of everything. I know I wasted a lot of paper, but in class, you can see that there's like blue ink and red ink. So the blue ink is what I put in class, what I was writing in class. So very little note taking. The red ink is everything that I wrote in after class when I was listening to my recording, okay? So in class, I mostly paid attention to the lecture, took very minimal notes because I just wanted to understand everything while I was in class. When I went home, I kind of re-listened to my recordings and I took in all the notes that I had missed from the initial get-go, okay? And here's another example of what I did with images. So I got these pictures from online, okay? And I ended up putting in more of my notes, just pictures, and I just annotated all the diagrams to make sure that I understood every component of the image, of the diagram. And then again, for visual learners, so like I said, like I mentioned before, I was studying for the MCAT earlier this, well, at the end of last year, and I needed to brush up on reproductive hormones. So I ended up, and I used an app called Notability. So it's for any tablet you can get it for. And you could import pictures, and I literally just drew in all these different markings on my iPad. So, let's kind of brush along into the other slides quickly. We have a few more left, so we should be done soon. So we have the Pomodoro technique. So this is a way that you can study for classes while you're studying for classes. Essentially here, it's what we discussed a little earlier, where you're studying for a certain time period, 20, 30 minutes, whatever it is, depending on your attention span. Personally, 20 minutes and I get distracted. All right. So 20 minutes, I study and then I take another, like a 5 to 10 minute break. I do this 4 times. After the 4th time, I take a 30-minute break. I go get something to eat. Okay. This is very, very useful. All right. There's only so much that your brain can take in for elongated periods of time. Okay. And you'll see that if anyone's here planning to go into like a professional degree, so MD, DO, DDS, whatever it is, all these exams that you take for all these professions, they suck the life out of you. And so spacing out your studying really helps you mentally like absorb as much information as possible. All right. So the Pomodoro technique is very useful, I think. Next, retrieval practice. So again, all the professors have already alluded to this earlier, but if you use things like practice tests, which I know that 105 we give out study questions and practice questions. Dr. Baker said he has, I think, study questions for you guys, but use them, right? They're generated for a reason. We give them out for a reason, okay? In the case where you use all that material and you have nothing else to use, go on to Quizlet. People have made flashcards or questions with flashcards already for you. So you can definitely use that as well. Make your own questions, right? Make your own Quizlet, make your own Anki deck, whatever it is, okay? Use flashcards. So Quizlet and Anki, so Anki is not free, Quizlet is free, I believe. But they both equally work pretty well with your phones anyways. If you want, you can use the Lightner system. This is where it, again, involves flashcards, but this is usually physical flashcards. Anki uses the same type of system, but it does it electronically for you. But in the case where you want to use physical cards, that's fine as well. Pretty much you set up 5 different boxes, and all the questions, all the flashcards start off in one box. And then every time you get a card correct, you move it over to the next box. All right. If you get a card incorrect, it goes back a box. Okay. And then every box has a certain increment of time that is required for you to test at, right? So if things are in box 2, then you test those items every 2 days. If things are in box 5, you've mastered them pretty well, you test on that stuff every 2 weeks. All right. So you can set that up for yourselves as well. Space practice. So like I had mentioned before, if you know the syllabus, if you know the schedule of the semester, and you know the topics you're covering, just space out your studying already. Make a schedule for yourself, right? Learn the material in class, and then every couple of days revisit it. Every week revisit it, right? And keep studying, scaffold on top of each other over and over and over. Then we have the Feynman technique. So this is pretty much like teach yourself, right? Not teach yourself, but be the teacher when you're trying to explain it to yourself, okay? So this one, typically you take a piece of paper, or again, an iPad's fine if you want to do it in notes. You write down the concept at the top of the paper, and then you write down facts that are associated with that topic, any kind of notes that are relevant to that topic. And then you're going to go back into your notes and textbook to see if you're wrong or right, okay? Additionally, you can do this by, I used to take my PowerPoint slides from lecture, use my annotated slides, and I would actually lecture to myself back for an hour and 30 minutes. The entire lecture, beginning to end, to make sure that I got all the facts I needed for this particular topic. That's another option for you as well. So how should you prepare for class? Kind of just a summary slide going over all the material. You can read or skim the slides or the textbook or textbook before going to class. When you get to class, again, this is building off my own experience. I would take very minimal notes. And the reason for that is because if you're taking notes while the professor is talking, you don't retain as much. You're concentrated solely on writing things down all the time. So I used to go into class and I used to just sit there and listen. If something was of interest to me or it caught my attention, then I would take small little notes on the side of the paper. But while I was in class, I also was recording my lecture. All right. So I have recordings. I have all my recordings from Dr. Ma's 105 class, from Dr. Fath's cell bio. Like, I have everyone's recordings still. And I used to listen back to them, and I used to take in notes on my slides. If I needed some time to write something down, I just pause the recording, and then I would write it down, make it look nice, readable. I would press play again and continue on like that. All right. And I did this typically over a period of 2 to 3 days after that class. So I didn't wait a whole week. At some point that did happen, I ended up severely behind on my studies, but I always caught up at the end. Okay. Because again, I was trying to meaningfully study for my classes. Then I would actually go back into my textbook, read up any of the relevant sections, things I was confused on. I went back to review the slides, and then ended up reciting and retaining all the information or reviewing the information. And again, I did this by literally putting up the lecture slides on my computer, or I found the projectors in some classroom or whatever it was. I used to stand in my room, in the middle of my room, and just like lecture to myself with a laser pointer and everything, just so I can go over the material out loud and reason with myself out loud. All right. Sounds strange, but it works. The other thing I wanted to mention briefly is time blocking. All right. So essentially making yourself a schedule where you block out time for your studying. All right. Your time blocking should include classes first. All right. Your study time second, and then your work and extracurricular stuff. Sorry, I had to cough for a second because my throat was so dry. So very important that you do this. If anyone wants a time blocking template on a Word document, you can shoot me an email or Alan an email and he'll forward it to me. And I will gladly give you a template for this as well. All right. This is my example from when I was taking, when I was doing the MCAT practice. Okay, so that's time blocks. And all right, so some last minute pointers, and then we can break out into groups for a couple of minutes. So first things first, study to understand, right? Don't just memorize things. Yes, you're gonna have to memorize facts and all that stuff, absolutely. But you also have to be able to apply those facts, right? So you need to be able to, again, scaffold material on top of each other to make sure that you understand the bigger picture, right? So very important that you study to understand, but not simply just to memorize. Content before integration. So again, you want to make sure that you are studying in such a way where you understand the material before you start to kind of integrate it into your examples, right? Or before you start to think about larger processes or larger examples or whatever it may be. Commitment. So that's a big one for a lot of students. You really need to be committed to this, right? Like Alan was saying, or I don't remember who was saying this, but like if you're not spending 6+ hours a week studying for the class, the lecture alone, that's a problem, all right? There's a lot of material, there's a lot of vocabulary that you guys are not familiar with whatsoever. There are a lot of different chapters, right? And they're all somewhat related to each other. It's a lot of material. It's a lot of content. So you really need to be committed to studying on a set schedule, right? So have a goal in mind and stick with it. Don't drop out last minute or anything. And take the time that you need to comprehend the material, all right? Because if you don't take the time to understand, you're really going to have a hard time later on when the test comes around. So to prevent that, spend the time now to understand the material. Like everyone else alluded to earlier, understand or use flashcards, right? For terms, concepts, facts, make up questions, short answer questions, whatever it is. Use the materials that are provided to you. Next, form a learning collective. So this is where you're studying in small groups, right? Research has in fact shown that a lot of students who study together do really well together, all right? I'll give you an example. When I took 105 here, I remember there were a group of 10 of us, not a really small group, but there were a group of 10 of us, and we would meet on a regular basis once a week, every single week, and we would argue back and forth about answers to questions, because someone thought it was right, someone thought it was wrong. We would bounce ideas off each other. And I remember one time we sat in the library, in the foyer outside the library, and we were literally yelling at the top of our lungs, arguing over a question. You're collaborating with your peers, exchanging ideas, and you're learning from them as well, and they're learning from you, right? So it's very important that you find a study group or make a study group, all right? And the easiest way to do that is to do it with the people in your lab. You're literally sitting with 5 other people in your lab every week. Make friends, okay? Use all the available resources. So I'm not sure about 106 in particular, but for 105, I can say that there are a lot of resources that we have available, from practice questions, study sheets, from the textbook questions that are actually in your book, right? As well as things that are on Quizlet. A lot of people don't use these things. Use them. We post them for a reason. Start studying from the get-go. So I'm not sure when the 106 lecture is. I think it starts Thursday. But the 105 lecture is on Thursday night, 6:30. So today's Tuesday. You have a 2-day head start. Start reading the first chapter. Start skimming the first chapter. Look at the first set of slides. They're online already, I believe. So start doing stuff now, right? The earlier you start, the better. And always make sure that you are sleeping and eating well. I know it sounds like intuitive, but like if you're not sleeping well, if you're not eating well, you're gonna have a really hard time studying and retaining information in all your classes. Other things, don't be afraid to ask for help. I think I can speak for everyone in both classes. All the instructors want their students to do well. I don't think anyone is looking to actively fail anyone. So ask for help. If you are confused about something, if you need help with something, ask for help, all right? You've met your lecture professors already, so you should be acquainted with them, all right? There are people also, so talk with them, be social with them, okay? On top of that, in both 105 and 106, we have peer mentors or tutors in some of the labs, all right? All the students have access to the tutors and peer mentors, but some of the labs have an actual person in the lab with them, along with their instructor. So use the peer mentors, use the tutors. You know, we have so many tutors this semester for all the classes, so use them, ask them questions. There are students just like you, a little older, but they know the material, right? They're well versed in the concepts. So use them. Go see us during office hours. You know, go see your professors during office hours. Very important that you do. Textbooks. If you cannot afford a textbook, we have textbooks on reserve. So there are books in the library that you can use. There are also books in the Learning Commons. I think we have 2 or 3 copies of the textbook for 105 and 106 in the Learning Commons. In case you don't know, the Learning Commons is in Kylie 131, right? That's the department that I'm from. And another few points, you know, it's okay to feel overwhelmed. Again, a lot of material in these classes. So I think it's really important that you take a step back, assess where you are, and kind of start pushing forward, right? And sometimes if you need help with that, don't be afraid to ask for help, all right? And finally, failure is sometimes part of the journey. I don't want it to be like the culminating ideal that I throw out there today, but it may take you some time to adjust yourself to the rhythm that you need to be at to just to do well in the class, all right? And that's fine. It's all on a learning curve. Everyone starts off at a learning curve, all right? So just bear that in mind, and I think you'll have a great semester, okay? And then the last slide here is for you guys to scan this
Last
QR
slide.
code.
What's the point of joining?
So this is the last slide. And you can scan the QR code. It will take you to a link tree thing on your phone where we put little buttons whatever that you can press to do all this, right? So the QC website learning commons, and then if you look right here, here is the book a tutoring session. So this is the link that we're going to be using in a few weeks when we start opening up tutors or allowing tutoring sessions to begin. So where you can make an appointment with the biology peer mentors or tutors to sit down with them and have a tutoring session. So this is the link here. And then we have the 105 review schedule as well. I think we're going to be doing a 106 review schedule this semester as well. So, but we'll be in touch about that. And then we have the bio department website if you want to find anything related to the classes. Okay. So with that in mind, I am going to break out the rooms one more time. We have 5 minutes left. So I think what we'll do is just not to keep everyone waiting and not to do work or anything with everyone. So you guys can all leave on time. I think I'm going to have the peer mentors that are in the room right now just unmute themselves, show their faces, say hi so they know who the students will be working with, and then we'll end it there. Okay. But you have a template for the Cornell method note-taking skill thing on in that handout. All right. And I'll drop the link to the handout in the chat for you guys as well. All right, this is the link to the handout. Okay, so here are all the peers that we have in the room with us today. So I guess we can start off with Tanya because you're at the top of my screen. You want to say hi to them, and then say hi, who you are, what you mentor, and then I guess what class standing you are. I don't know.
Hello, everyone. My name is Tanya. I'm currently a biology and nutrition tutor. I'm currently in my last semester of my master's degree in nutrition. So I look forward to meeting all of you. And I'm also in Bio 105 lab. I'll be assisting Christiana. So it's wonderful to meet you all.
Kirk?
Hi, everyone. My name is Kirk. I'll be tutoring Bio 105. So I'm an accelerated master in behavioral neuroscience student. So I look forward to a great semester with you all.
Awesome. Catherine?
Hi, guys. My name is Catherine. I'm a biology major. I'm a junior. And this semester, I'm going to be tutoring for Bio 105 and also for microbiology.
Okay. And Chardom?
Hi everyone, my name is Sharnom. I'm a neuroscience major and a sophomore. I'll be tutoring for biology 106. So hopefully you guys come, take advantage of all the resources, and it'll be nice to meet you all.
All right, so those are some of the bio peers that you guys will be interacting with over the course of the semester. And on that note, I think we're done for today. Does anyone have any kind of questions for me?
Yeah, I have one. Well, yeah. Can you give us like some tips for the exams, like studying for the exams? Because I kind of have like a hard time for that. Like I understand the material, I can like know it, but then when the exam comes, my mind just like blocks every information. So do you have like any tips for it? Can be like controlling our nerves or just like take the exam in a good way, we can say? So I think, at least from my own experience, because I also have some anxiety issues when it comes to taking exams. As far along as I am, it still happens. So at least for some of my friends, even the issue sometimes was sitting in a certain part of the classroom. So like if you're sitting all the way at the top of the room, you look down and you see all these people, right? It gets a little overwhelming. So I would say, one, come in, sit in front of the room. And that goes for even just class in general, sit in the front of the room.
All right. I guess your professors may pay attention to you a little more better, so they'll know who you are, maybe. And also you'll have less distraction in front of the room. Two, for exams, if you can, maybe sit in a seat, or like sit somewhere where you know that you can get to when the exam starts, so you can sit in the same seat. All right. Because sitting in the same seat, I know that sometimes may allow for a much more easier recall during class time, during exam time. In terms of stress, nerves, this is what I do. I don't know if this might help, but you can drink some peppermint tea. It relaxes you, right? Before the exam. But then also it's going to take time for you to get less anxious. So it's not going to happen overnight, but yeah, I think most of the time when people lose what they claim to have retained for the exam is because they're just anxious during the exam. It's not because they don't know it. They get nervous. But again, you can come see any of the peers, and we'd be glad to help you with that as well. Right, peers? Nod yes. Yeah. So I hope that partially answered your question, maybe.
Yeah, thank you so much.
And one other thing that I also want to mention is that we're going to be beginning tutoring sessions starting the 6th of February. Okay. So and actually about a week. So 2 weeks. Does anyone else have any other questions for me or for the peers? I think Dr. Baker is still here. Yes. So yeah, you can scan the QR code and then click on the book the tutoring session button, and then it'll take you to the booking app. All right, but it's not active just yet.
I have a question. Do you know when the book tutoring sessions will start? Do you guys have a week planned?
Yes. So all tutoring sessions, all the review sessions begin February 6th.
Okay, great. Thank you.
So it's the Monday after next. So, or 2 weeks from yesterday. All right. So if you guys don't have any other questions, you guys are free to go. Thank you very much for attending. Hope to work with you throughout the remainder of the semester. The slides, I think we can probably share the slides. But I know that the recording will be on the Learning Commons website as well. Where did you get the physical copy of the textbook? Can one of you guys, one of the peers, pull up the textbook webpage thing for QCs and drop it in the chat for them?